Yeah, so welcome everybody to the December HANC meeting, and we're going to be, what we're covering today is JFK Drive and redistricting. But before we get started, just want to give time if anybody here has any general announcements they want to make. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself. And you could also put announcements in the chat. But I think I've been doing it at the end of meetings rather than the start. So that's a good reminder. Try and do it at the start. Okay, no, don't see any announcements. So, oh, okay. Let's see an announcement. Luke, you have an announcement?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, David. I am an organizer with KidSafe SF, and we are having a family and community-friendly event on JFK next Sunday. So from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., we'll be having food trucks and live music, arts and crafts, story time for kids, and a whole bunch of other things. So if anyone's around and wants to join, we'd love to have you out there. You can find more information at jfkholidayparty.com. I'll throw it in the chat as well for anyone who wants to see that.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other announcements? Okay, so we'll just get started with the JFK Drive portion of the meeting, and I'll hand it over to Jamie, who's on the board of HANC, to kind of introduce the topic and the folks that will be presenting. And Jamie, just let me know who's presenting. I can co-host people and they can share screen.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. Hey, everybody.
Are there any public comments or alerts?
We were doing quick announcements in the start. Do you have a quick one?
Yes.
Okay, go. Sorry, Jamie. Okay, go for it.
Thanks. You're really prompt. It's 7:02. I had a little trouble getting in. This is Peter Warfield from Library Users Association. And two things I wanted to say. Basically, libraries are starting to open up again from COVID, but unfortunately, there's some really serious hollowings out of service. So, for example, the few libraries that have evening hours are only open till 8 instead of 9, including our Park branch, when they all were open till those that were open in the evening were open till 9, typically, almost all of them. And there are other issues going on as well. The Mission branch is having a $25 million renovation, some of which looks really good, but they haven't really alerted folks or let people generally know on the website or through mailings, other than the ones that are just on their mailing list via email. So if anybody is concerned about libraries being sort of having reductions of all kinds of service and accessibility, please get in touch with me. I'll give a contact information. The other thing is that the library, and for that matter, many other agencies in the city are kind of abandoning many of the ways that you were able to get in touch through, for example, a personal visit to an office or through a telephone call. And more they're assuming that everybody has internet access or a smartphone. And that is just not true by the city's own analysis, probably over 100,000 people. So I'm very concerned with kind of the abandonment of all the folks that are not in a position or don't want to have access. Typically, the most affected are minorities, older people, poorer people, disproportionately more affected. So if any of those issues concern you or are of interest, I'd be glad to have contact with you. Email address libraryusers2004@yahoo.com. And by mail, especially if you're privacy-oriented, P.O. Box 170544, San Francisco, California, 94117-0544. Thanks very much, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Great, thanks. That was libraryusers2004@yahoo.com.
at yahoo.com,
Okay.
correct.
I'll put it in chat. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and now, yeah, over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Want to thank everybody for being here for this discussion. I see Dan Maurer from Rec and Park. And hi, Dan. And I'm not sure if, oh, there's Hava Cronenberg from SFMTA, and Pyra is here from Senior and Disability Action. So just a real quick introduction. Tonight, we're going to talk and hear, we're first going to hear about the formal planning process that's going on for the continued closure or reopening of JFK. So we're going to hear about that. And that's going to be done, I think, jointly by Rec and Park and also SFMTA. And then that's going to be followed up with a discussion from Pyra, from SDA, about what their interest is in the project. I know they've been stakeholders, and we'll hear about their concerns and issues they've been working on. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers for the group. And we have until 8:15. So I'll just sort of monitor time and all that to keep things on track. And I believe that we have the PowerPoint presentation downloaded, I believe. Is that hopefully true?
Yeah, we can show it, or if Dan or Java wants to present, you can do that also, whatever is easier.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to show screen and share and go through the slides, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Thanks, Dan.
Great. I'm going to try to upload it right now without messing my computer up. So bear with me here for a sec. Did that come up okay for you guys?
Yep.
Great, great. So should we begin?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Dan? Be great.
Great. Yeah, just a little background. My name's Dan Maurer. I'm with the Recreation and Park Department in their Capital Improvement Division, and I do project management for park construction work. And joining me today is Hava with the MTA. She's one of our project partners, moving this project through this planning, this public outreach process. We have I don't know the exact count here, about 28 slides. We'll try to move through them quickly because I think it's more important that we get you guys' feedback on the presentation. We can always go back and look at slides if we went too fast. So with that, I'm going to try to move through the slides here. My apologies. So let me move this out of the way. Why we're here, and what our little overview here, we're going to talk about why we're here, a little bit about the program background, improvements that are currently underway as part of this program. And then I'm going to pass the slides over to Hava, and she's going to go through the program proposals, what we're looking at to improve access and safety, what our current community outreach process has been, and where we're moving from now. And then obviously the important part is getting your feedback on the project. A little bit about Golden Gate Park, as you can see here from history photos. You know, Golden Gate Park's always been about spaces for the people since its inception. And it's important that we recognize, and then the project team, as we move through this, realizes that the institutions are critical parts of the experience for Golden Gate Park. So they're a critical component that we're evaluating as we move through this. And that's not only the two major institutions, it's all the other park amenities that are part of this area of the park. A little information. What we found from some studies pre-COVID is that it was determined that about 75% of traffic that was moving through the project area we're talking about from Kezar to Transverse was transitory traffic that was moving through the park without actually stopping in the park to utilize the park. And again, these are approximate figures, and we can talk more about that. The other thing is we were able to get some approximate figures about how many people have visited the park since April 2020 when the roadway was closed. And it's an estimate, obviously, but over 7 million folks have visited this segment of the closed roadway since April 2020, which is an approximate 30% increase in park visits. As you're all probably familiar with, the city's program of Vision Zero and the goal to reduce collisions and injuries that happen throughout the city. The segment of roadway that we're talking about here tonight is on that list of Vision Zero targeted streets. Over the 5-year period prior to the road closure, I believe there was in excess of 36 major injury collisions that happened along our roadway segment. This slide, I'm not going to get into the details here, but you can kind of see the different bubbles that are on there, and the bigger and darker red bubbles are where we have more collisions, interactions between pedestrians, bikes, and cars. And it's an obvious statement, but one worth stating is that since we closed in 2020, we've had 0 incidents between vehicles and pedestrian and bikes in this segment, which seems intuitive, but there are vehicles that are traveling through there on occasion for maintenance and other activities. But it's gone a long way to try to meet the goal of Vision Zero. So I mentioned that we actually have some work that's actually been completed and or underway, some what I'm calling auxiliary improvements underway. And what these include are new on-street ADA spaces that we brought back to the area. Currently, we brought back 8 additional ADA zones as part of the road closure. We lost some ADA on JFK between 8th and 10th. And since then, we were able to bring back 8. Also, we've continued to encourage music concourse pickup and drop-off zones in the concourse area. When we closed the roadway back in 2020, Conservatory Drive West was actually closed to vehicles, and since then we've reopened that to a cul-de-sac condition so that we have better access to the Conservatory Valley and the Dahlia Dell. That was opened in October. Other elements that we're working on is we're looking to renovate the bandshell parking lot right behind the bandshell structure, and we're looking to start construction on that in early next year, midwinter. And then also looking at doing some pedestrian bike vehicle circulation improvements down by the polo fields. Right now there's some confusion and conflicts there that we're working on resolving. Some operational items that we are working on as well as adaptive bike share events, which are currently underway. And then the other thing we're also looking at is looking to improve the parking rate situation at the Music Concourse Garage. Legislation was in front of the Board of Supervisors, and if I am correct, Javi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it actually passed recently, where we're looking to provide some opportunities for different dynamic parking rates in the garage to try to optimize.
That's exactly correct. It recently passed the Board of Supervisors.
Great. And then the last one on the list here is the Golden Gate Park shuttle. We've had a shuttle in the park for some time, and we recognize that it's not operating and functioning as well as it should be. And so we're looking to improve that program with better routes, higher frequencies, and make it more friendly for people to utilize. New accessible parking, I mentioned that just briefly. We realize that accessible parking in the park is a valuable asset that we need to work towards and improve upon. And that's what we've heard from seniors and folks with disabilities on that. As I mentioned, we completed 5 new spaces on MLK, 3 new spaces on Nancy Pelosi Drive. There are currently 4 spaces behind the bandshell, which I mentioned, which are free and open 7 days a week. And we're looking to expand that to 19 spaces. And I think that hits this slide here. Passenger loading zones and paratransit. Vehicles can access the passenger loading zones and drop off and pick up in the DeYoung and Museum from both the north and south from a paratransit standpoint. The general public can enter the concourse from the south right now and can get access to the front doors of both the institutions. So we're encouraging that. The other thing on the second bullet here is there's a 15-minute free drop-off and pickup zone in the garage, which many people aren't aware of. It's just hasn't been publicized as well, and we're looking to do a better job at that. But people can get into the garage and drop people off at either institution in the garage and then leave without being charged for that visit. And then paratransit vehicles can enter the park at 8th Avenue for fast access to the concourse. So they have access just like the 44 Muni that goes through there. This is a difficult slide to read on our computers, I realize, but what we're trying to show here is that, you know, all the available ADA spots that are currently in the park right now. And this map is actually on MTA and Rec Park's website. We're trying to do a better job of informing folks of this and also improve on how to communicate these amenities within the park and provide better direction on how to get to those spots. Now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Hava, and she'll go through the next several slides on this one.
Sure. I just want to make sure, Jamie, would you like me to answer some of the questions that I've been seeing in the chat before we move on, or would you like us to finish the presentation and then we'll talk about some of those questions?
Yeah, so it looked to me like the questions that were coming in were about data collection and analysis. Mostly, I think there were a couple others. I think it would be useful maybe to answer everything at the end.
Okay.
Maybe
Great.
even after SDA makes its presentation.
Okay.
If that works for folks.
Okay.
So let's try that.
Great. So thank you, Dan. Again, I'm Hava. I'm with the MTA. I'm the pedestrian program manager. I'm very glad to be working with my Rec Park colleagues on this project. And this is the first time I'm working on actually a smaller screen. So I'm struggling with, like, I usually have a much bigger screen. I'm struggling to see all the things I'm supposed to see. But I think Dan just said, okay, let's talk about the program proposals that the city has put forward. And these were just to start the conversation with our public and to give people things to react to. We're now 3 months in to outreach. This is one of our, we're sort of on the tail end of this outreach process. And I'm going to say that some of the proposals that you'll see in this deck have really resonated to people. Others have absolutely not. Some have raised more questions than answers. And so the idea was not to say, here's the only choices among them. The idea was to really get a robust conversation. And I'm happy to report a little bit more on what we've learned along the way, because that would be that's new information that we've been just listening for the last 3 months. So when we developed engineering considerations, we can't just put anything on the street. From an engineering perspective, anything we design for vehicles, bicycles, and people walking needs to be legible, safe, and feasible. We wanted to make sure that whatever proposal we were putting forward allowed for the addition of blue zone parking, which was a feedback that we'd heard in prior parts of our outreach. Critical, as Dan mentioned, is the park institutions are central to the park experience, and they do have delivery access requirements. And lastly is that, through decades of legislation and rules, the idea is that we do need to provide pick up and drop off access to those park institutions. On the sort of park value side, those are the MTA values side. On the park values side, and in many of the park's documents, the goal is to minimize disruption to the current park use and visitor experience. That the car-free experience in our feedback has been a positive one for many, and we wanted to maintain the majority of that if possible. And lastly is to prevent this new cut-through traffic, which is undesirable from a park experience perspective. Next slide, Dan. We're in this sort of mid-COVID alignment where we closed the roads for COVID, but we need to decide on what the streets look like after this emergency. And this emergency is, much longer than any of us intended. But now we need to sort of say that the emergency is coming to a close and let us decide how our streets should look after COVID is over. And so some of the decisions we can make in this time frame is which streets should be open or closed to cars post-COVID in Golden Gate Park. And what are some supportive transportation policies or projects or programs that make access better to the park? And things that we would struggle to deliver on in the same time frame is any broader capital improvements. Something like a traffic signal is a long implementation timeline. And then something I'm sure all of you have heard about is, the music concourse garage. And so that is not under the authority of Rec Park or MTA. It's not under the authority of the city. And so we have sort of, while we do have flexible parking rates now offered to us, something we can do that doesn't require us to change park code, there's still very limited possibilities about what city staff and departments can do. Okay, next slide. So the proposals that we put forward in September, and again, we've heard tons of feedback about this, and we've even had new ideas coming in. And some of these have floated and some of these have not, but this is what we put out there originally. Improve the park shuttle to make it more useful for everyone. There was a question, is the park shuttle ADA accessible? It is designed and intended to be a mobility device. It is there for people who cannot just walk across the park. And so yes, it is both ADA accessible. However, the feedback we've heard is robust and sincere and authentic that the shuttle sucks. And so I think we can all agree that is something that I think everyone can agree on. And so the city is committed to improving it. An idea that we put out there has been putting additional parking, loading, and potentially blue zones on Fulton Street, which is directly accessible to the park. This is a space that we've heard not such great feedback about. New taxi stands inside the park, and what we intended by that was within music concourse, and that's because taxis often are providing a paratransit service, and so that means they're moving someone with a disability, and so they're part of our mobility system for people who have limited or no mobility, and this taxi stand would solve for a minor part of those concerns. Next slide. Improving signage is so broad, as everybody can agree that there certainly needs to be more signage. And one of this is intended to just say that the garage, it's not immediately legible to any new user, that you can do free drop-off pickup in the garage. And so for those of you who do not know that, if you are going with a friend and they'd like direct access to the elevators at the Cal Academy, I highly encourage you to go into the garage and do your drop-off pickup. Some other mobility options that we could offer is additional bike racks for dockless bike share and dock scooter share that could be operating within the park. And lastly is permitting a pedicab service to run within the park. So those are some just program proposals that staff put out there, and we've heard a lot of feedback about all of those. How many taxi stands? So it would be 2 taxi stands within music concourse. Sorry, just because that's right there and it popped up. 2 taxi stands, one on the Cal Academy side and one on the DeYoung side. And the idea would be that, first of all, you would be able to hail a taxi anywhere within the park. That would be a new rule that we would be allowed to facilitate. And secondly, this would be a taxi stand so that a taxi could wait and allow for passengers who are coming. And it's often it's a great choice. You get there, there's a taxi and you can immediately use it. And that's what a taxi stand allows for. Okay, next slide. So this describes the program proposal. So to the question of where the taxi stand, I know this slide might be small for some of you, but you can see Dan's cursor pointing to those 2 taxi stands as proposed, one on the DeYoung, one on the Cal Academy, and allows the taxi to just wait and make themselves available to a user who would be interested in using them. And then you can see we also have, proposals over potential bike share stations, bike parking stations. We've exhibited our Fulton Street loading zone. We're happy to come back to the slide if there are specific questions. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we do have recommendations, or not recommendations. We have proposals for alignment, and so we have 3 sort of distinct, four distinct choices and 3 distinct proposals. One is to extend the car-free route, so to continue the current condition of the car-free route and maintain it as is, with some access via Nancy Pelosi and Conservatory Drive West, but continuing essentially the car-free route from Stanyon to Transverse as you would experience it today. So, and all the benefits are listed in sort of the lower part of the slide. Next slide. We also have the proposal of keeping the car-free route on the west end, with some exception for shared roads and middle drive that allow for access directly to the polo fields parking lot, which is, primarily used for kids soccer and cross country races and a variety of needs that require sometimes a car. But it does extend all the way from Transverse to Lincoln Way. And so it's a few miles of car-free space on the west side. Okay, next slide. A different option that emerged and that we proposed as part of this public vetting was we had been specifically requested by a number of organizations, including the Cal Academy, was to look for a partial closure option. And so the recommendation of city staff that met our sort of criteria the best was what we were calling this private vehicle access area that would run from 8th to Transverse. And so the northern side of JFK would be for cars who are driving westbound, and it would allow for additional ADA spaces to be returned to JFK. And the southern part of the roadway, and as many of you know, because I know you're all neighbors, that roadway kind of shrinks and widens a lot in its course, would be retained for people walking and biking. Another benefit of this proposal would be that currently the young loading is done through escort or just through harsh feelings in from 8th to their loading access, but here they would have a roadway that would allow them to directly access their southern delivery space. And so this would formalize what is currently an informal process. Okay, and the other option that we've put out there, and is for our consideration from the public, I see a Jersey barrier. We did have not made it to the detailed design phase of any of these proposals. So it could be a Jersey barrier, it could be plastic delineators, it could be trees. I think that the universe is very wide in that proposal. Okay, so we're not sure of the barriers. We just wanted to get the feedback about whether this was a viable choice for people in the community. Okay, next slide. So last one is the no project option, and that would be returning the roadways to their pre-COVID condition, although we would keep JFK car-free as it has been on most Saturdays in the summer and every Sunday as it has been since 1967. And so those would of course be retained, but otherwise the roads would return to their pre-COVID condition. And that is of course a proposal that we've put out there for public feedback. Okay, next slide. Community engagement. You are here. We are here at community engagement. You are being engaged, and I am glad to be here with you all. Dan, I think, has hosted all 50 of these public events. Dan has been for everyone. I've been in and out because I'm not as committed to the cause as Dan, but I think we're somewhere in the 50s of events, and we intend on doing far more. We're really trying to focus our outreach on direct neighbors, as this group is, equity priority communities. There is concern about access from the outer neighborhoods into Golden Gate Park, which is of course the focus and the highly programmed area of our park system. We've been focusing our energy on working with seniors and people with disabilities who raised concerns early and often, and we've been hearing them. And we have a number of multilingual entries into this process. In addition, we've hosted a monolingual Chinese walking tour of our of the project area. And so we have heard from thousands of San Franciscans, just like you all, and we have heard a vast array of feelings and needs, and it's a lot to take in and to synthesize. And some of this feedback has been really pointing us in new directions and challenging the city to think about what we need to do to meet the many needs that we're hearing out of you all. That's correct. We is only MTA and Rec Park. Thank you. We are here at every event together, and we are city staff. Okay, next slide. We did host an online survey. That is just one input to obviously the myriad of ways that we've engaged stakeholders. And so we did ask the opinion of many of the proposals we had originally put out there in September. There are obviously going to be new ideas that emerge through this process, and they already have. And so they're not, the survey was just one way of us sort of gauging public sentiment and making sure that we were hearing broadly from a broad group of people, but just one input. And so we do have a generally favorable survey result for the car-free routes. but we still have many people who would prefer the roads return to their pre-COVID condition. And then our proposals all got like varying levels of support across the board. So it gave us a lot of pause and food for thought about how we want to address it. Okay, next. So here we're looking for your feedback. I have seen, like, I can only like half see the chats coming in, and they've been coming in far faster and more furious than I've been able to read them. So I think this really concludes our presentation. I turn the time over to you, Jamie. Thank you for having us. Oh, wow. Oops, there we go. Sorry, we did have a next steps. Hold on, let me get to the next steps. Dan, can you fly back to the schedule just so you know where you all are? Not this one, but the next one, the prior one, we are here, just so that you all have, yeah. So, you know, we spent the summer developing these ideas, synthesizing the information we already heard, and then starting our engagement process. We're here in what has become the winter, but we really spent the last 3 months engaging with park stakeholders like yourself. And now we're starting to shift, although we are still far into our outreach phase. We have identified that there are definitely areas we would like to hear and engage more in specific communities. And so we're going to make sure that we spend the time doing our due diligence to reach out to people who may have a hard time getting to us, but we want to make sure we've engaged them meaningfully and that we've incorporated their input into this process. And as we take all that in and synthesize it, this decision goes to the Board of Supervisors. So Dan and I are city staff, and we're not decision makers. And we've put all these ideas out there for you all to consider. And we're happy to answer questions. So thank you.
I'm going to take us off screen share so that we can see each other here.
Muted, Jamie. I think you're still muted.
Can you see or hear me, Peter Warfield?
Yeah, hold
Thank
on
you.
one
Can you
second.
hear me?
Yeah, there you go, Jamie.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So I think what we should do in the interest of time, and I'm going to take a look at what's in the chat room. Why don't we pass the gavel over to Pyra and hear a little bit or as much as you like from SDA, and then save time at the end for questions and answers. We'll likely have around 20-30 minutes for questions and answers. So Pyra, if you're here, and I'm having a hard time seeing you.
Well, that's all right. I'm lost in these park pictures.
Okay.
And I have to say in the beginning, thank you, Greg Garr, for providing these pictures to me over 25 years ago. So here we go. Let me show myself. Hold on one second. Here I am. So basically, what I was told, basically what I think I'm presenting here is just basically where we stand on this particular issue. And also, before I start that, I'd like to make a request from the MTA. There's a little update I thought you were going to mention about the shuttle, because there was a meeting last week regarding the design. So, and then a lot of positive stuff came out of that.
Yeah,
So-
Pi, do you want me to just give a brief update on that?
Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So we as I mentioned, the shuttle is not working for anyone, and we the city and my colleagues at Rec Park specifically hosted a charrette for people with disabilities to get their specific feedback about the shuttle and what it would take to improve it, who they want the shuttle to serve, how they wanted the shuttle to serve those communities, and what values were most important to them as we think about what shuttle improvements we would like to make. And so great feedback in terms of, you know, it was authentic, and, you know, sometimes it's hard to hear, but I think we can all agree that the shuttle is seriously underperforming, and the city is absolutely committed to spending the time and the resources to make the shuttle far better. And that was just the beginning. And so I wanted to thank Pi, if I could just do a little love fest over there. Pi, thank you for gathering those people for us and helping to facilitate a really positive conversation. And so that's just the beginning of thinking hard about what to do to make the shuttle work best for everyone, but especially for the people who need it most.
Thank you very much for that. So let me start with it's late. This is only my 6th Zoom meeting, so bear with me. For many years, senior and disability community has been dealing with accessibility issues in the Golden Gate Park. But it wasn't until the pandemic hit that it really highlighted those. It's more like we hear a little bit over here from Richmond people, we hear a little bit in the Sunset people, some in the Bayview, but never highlighted, never intensely, with just a lot of people complaining. But when the pandemic hit, it really highlighted a lot of the accessibility issues in the park. And when the JFK was closed, most people still just complain about not being able to get to certain parts, but they thought that was temporary. So now we're talking about being permanent. We've been really overwhelmed with complaints and what we're going to do about it and everything. So through our transit justice group, we created a subcommittee to really verbalize, get together, really gel about what we want to happen in the park. And this has taken over 2 months. We're almost there because we have a wide range, like in our disability community, we have a wide range of impairments. We have a wide range of opinions, but this is what we have come up with. And it's almost ready to vote on, but it's close. We are saying that we do not want to have JFK, MLK, and Middle Drive to be closed permanently until it is accessible. But what are those accessible things? We can't just say until accessible. So we got a list of what we deem would help us to take advantage of the park just like everybody else. So we're saying, let's make it accessible first. The list goes starting with at every intersection. And then, sorry, I can't share this. My computer, every time I share, it will crash for some reason. I don't know what it is. It doesn't like sharing. At every intersection of a closed to motorized vehicle road, there will be passenger drop-off site, placard parking sites, and a shuttle bus stop. So right there, we're not saying the shuttle just be limited to JFK, but also to MLK and Middle Drive. The next part, 3 placard parking sites every 1/4 mile along non-closed park roads. So more designated ADA placard parking places in the park where the roads are open. All park roads that are closed to motorized traffic must have shuttle service that consists of, but not limited to, 10 to 15 minute wait time, designated bus stop at a maximum distance apart of 1/4 mile, at all popular destination sites, at every road intersection, and road intersection meaning closed with an open road, okay? And let's see here, in service, the service time or period would be at least dawn to dusk every day. And every shuttle stop has a bench and a wayfinding map. Somebody hinted should also have fog tanning lotion, but we won't go down there. All park roads are open when the shuttle service is not in service. Paratransit vehicles, which include taxis, must be allowed in the park for pickups and drop-offs. Currently, taxis are only allowed to drop off for some reason. Park must have at least 1 taxi stand per popular destination site. Affordable concourse garage parking for seniors, people with disabilities and low income individuals families. And notice it says affordable. It did not say free, even though we now know the city will regulate the price. We still know that there's a bond to be paid. Maintain maintain paved path, sidewalks, and ramps to and from all public bus and shuttle stops. We had noted that a lot of those sidewalks and ramps are in disrepair. They need to be fixed. They need to be maintained. And directional wayfinding signage, which includes but not limited to maps of the park and off-park attractions in a large print and tactile format. So that's the list we have come up with at this time. It's going to be tweaked a little bit more in the future, but it pretty much shows what we think would make the park accessible in order for us to enjoy the park just like anybody else. And also, when you close down JFK permanently, with these things, we can be there too.
Great. Thanks, Pi. I really appreciate that list. I just want to ask one question for you, which is, I'm hoping that that has been previously conveyed to SFMTA and Rec and Park.
We just got it together.
Ah, okay.
But
Okay.
Maddie has heard so far, just today.
Okay, so that's
So we are bringing it out.
excellent. Okay,
But it's news to me and Dan. This is news to
Oh
me and
yes,
Dan.
it's definitely news. It's news to me until I wrote it this morning.
excellent. I'm wondering, maybe Hava and Dan, would it be helpful? Well, I'm assuming maybe Pi, that's going to go to them in writing, or
Oh yes.
Okay,
That's part of
great.
the procedure.
okay, excellent. That's great. Okay, well, I think that's all we have for formal presentations on this. So I think we can open it up to general questions and answers, but I wanted to make sure that we got through the questions that were posted in the chat room. So if I can, I know there are a fair amount of questions here, and I think some of them have been answered. And so I think I'm gonna try to breeze through the ones that I believe have been answered. Like, for example, in the very beginning, people had questions about how use was being monitored. How I think you explained that. That went on for a little while here. There's questions about cell phone use and tracking data. If any of the people who posted the questions, like Kat and Richard or James, didn't get a full answer or an adequate answer, please chime in. So that went on for a little while. I'm just kind of breezing through here. There was a question about whether or not the shuttle was ADA compliant. The answer is yes. Although we've also heard from Hava that the shuttle isn't working well. I think that's kind of generally understood. Again, about data collection. And I'm just breezing through this about cell phone use and tracking. If I'm missing something important, please shout out. And I'm just looking through the questions in the chat room. I had a question about taxi service that's being talked about. I want to know if that included Uber. It sounds like the answer is no. It's just taxis with medallions would be able to access the park.
I just want to clarify that
Okay, great.
Ubers and Lyfts cannot, operate on any street in the city. They do. The taxi stands are only for taxis. That Ubers and Lyfts are not permitted to wait anywhere. That's not a function they're allowed to do. That's why you have to use an app to call them. That's why they're ride hailing. So having a taxi stand, for those who've worked with the taxi industry, they understand this is a distinct benefit to their service that is different than ride hailing and ride share.
This has been confusing on a couple other things. So there's actually taxis can come in and out of the park and pick someone up or drop someone off currently, and it's always been that way. There's actually legislation that says that taxis can't come, stop, and wait for a ride, like outside one of the institutions. And that's what we're talking about here, is affording them an opportunity with a space to sit and wait for a passenger to come and pick them up. So that's what the goal is here.
Great, thank you. Just looking again back at the questions, Kat and Richard had a question about can drivers get in and out of the garage in 15 minutes for pickup drop off on crowded days? Is there seating for those waiting for pickup? Maybe Dan or Hava, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so I believe there's, we've heard mixed reviews. Obviously, the garage gets busy on weekends or when one of the institutions has a major event out there of some sort. We've heard that some people have trouble getting in and out of the garage in that 15-minute window. But I would say a majority of the time when the garage isn't at occupancy, getting in and out in 15 minutes is doable. And again, that varies from person to person. We've heard from senior and disability community that sometimes it takes a bit more to get in and out, and then there might be a companion that needs to help someone get in and out as well. So it's not a perfect solution for everyone, but it's one quiver and one arrow in our quiver to help solve these problems. And again, better communication about that. You know, maybe if it needs to go from 15 to 20, that's something that could be negotiated. Yeah, so we've gotten both positive and negative feedback on people who've used that program.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here about how many bike share stations are being added.
We proposed 10 early on in the process, and I think right now we're hovering around 6. This is a Lyft program, and so we're in negotiations and talking with them about what they'd like to see and how they, you know, it's a business for them, and so they want to put them in high profile locations. And so I think right now they've identified 6 locations that they think are reasonable for that at this point, but we're still in negotiation with them.
Okay. Somebody has a question. I'm not sure. And so maybe they can clarify. It's from CS. What about people who cannot be left unattended after a drop off?
Yeah, I think I just mentioned that, like in the garage where.
Okay, that's that. Okay.
You know, I couldn't just drop my mom off and leave her there and then go park and come back and she'd be sitting there for 15 minutes by herself. So, you know, the unique situations that happen in all these occurrences, and again, trying to find opportunities for those that need that amenity. So we've heard that in many public meetings like this.
Great. And I know there was the question about the Jersey barrier, and just to clarify for the group, and I think Hava was the one who said this, design details for any of the options have not yet been decided on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're at what we would generously call the 0% design phase. These are lines on maps, and we're here to gain feedback about the lines on maps. And if people have specifics that are important to them about those, then we're happy to hear it. But we have not designed any further than the graphic you have all seen.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a question: who is going to enforce TNCs? I have to confess, I don't know what a TNC is, so.
Yeah, Jamie, that's the transportation network companies. That would be an Uber or Lyft.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't know if that's a general question about the city or the park. I don't.
That was my question.
And is it to go? I mean, so who will enforce TNCs in
Well,
the city?
you have taxi stands. You have TNCs that will absolutely take advantage of those taxi stands. Who's going to enforce that they don't take up the dedicated space that they're meant for?
So if a TNC stops and waits for a passenger and takes a passenger who has not pre-ordered their vehicle from a taxi stand, that is a big no-no in that department. And we have taxi stands, the MTA.
Who's going to enforce it?
Sorry, can I answer the question?
Who's going to enforce it?
Well, let me know when I should answer the question.
Why don't you go ahead,
Who's going to enforce it?
So
you're not answering the question.
So can we make an assumption that there might be somebody enforcing traffic violations?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer the question. I just can't talk over other people. So we have taxi stands all over the city. And the MTA manages our taxi program, and we do get feedback about the use of the taxi stands. And we do have a attorney and a team that works hard to make sure our taxi stands are used exactly for the purpose that they are intended for.
Okay. So the next question here is, will delivery vehicles in the loop option, I think that's option 1, unload on the north side, or will they need to cross the non-vehicle lane? Oh no, I guess that's option 2.
Yeah, they would actually have to cross the lane to get into their loading dock, which swoops down into their garage zone. And so again, as we mentioned, the lines on the drawings are conceptual at this phase, but it's always been envisioned by the technical team of MTA that we'd have to devise a system there so that we could stop traffic or provide a safe cross point at that. So there'd be a break in that line between PEDs and cars so that vehicles could get in and out of there. And I'd also imagine that we would probably still maintain the communication with our park rangers who currently shepherd those vehicles in and out of the park on a daily basis. And so we'd probably end up with a new agreement with our park rangers to help facilitate that crossing section.
Okay.
Are you going to call on folks who are on the telephone? I'm waiting on the telephone to speak, please.
Is that Peter?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
people,
and Jamie, we also have hands raised if you open up the participants pane.
yeah, so I was trying to go, I mean, we have a lot of questions in the chat room and I don't think they've all been answered. So I was trying to get answers to those. Maybe we'll just I'll try to do a little bit faster and then hopefully, we only have till 8:15. So hopefully we can get through as much as we're able tonight. There's just another question here about data collection and analysis, which I know, Javi, you addressed in the beginning, and I'm hesitant to get too deep into the weeds right now with that. Let me just move ahead. But David, I know you have a question here about that, so maybe we'll come back to that. Just moving along. Looking at a lot of comments about the garage. The fix. Yeah, so and actually Hava and Dan, maybe it's possible that there'll be another opportunity to hear from you about data collection and analysis, because I think I'm just seeing a lot of questions about that. Maybe we'll get there at the end. Will motorized scooters and bikes have access to JFK? Maybe that's a question for Hava or Dan.
Hava, I don't know if you have a technical, but I believe they would be. They just have to adhere to the same rules and regulations that a standard cyclist would. You know, I know that those things are like some of them are like motorcycles with regard to speed, and so we would definitely have a speed limit and better communications on how to utilize those spaces, not only for bicyclists but for pedestrians and joggers and other folks. And that's part of what we're looking at now, is how to identify a communication protocol to the users of that space so that they can use that space in conjunction with one another.
Okay. There's a question about third-party contracts and contractors and who's going to run. In this case, it's the shuttle, but I'm assuming that might come up about the various services that you're proposing in the park. And I don't know if you have that information yet.
So we actually have an existing contract with a vendor right now that we've been using for several years. And the city is actually, as a whole, is getting rid of all these other shuttle services contracts, and they're issuing a new contract at the beginning of the year. And the proposal is currently out on the streets, I believe, at this point. And so the department would end up using this new vendor that the city is hiring for shuttles across all departments. And so we'll know more at the beginning of the year when this new vendor comes on board. But we've been engaged with the group to identify exactly what we're looking for our shuttle program, so that the vendor can meet those requirements.
Okay. There's a question about I think you talked about the ADA parking area in back of the music concourse. And that's something that's going to be done regardless of which proposal you settle on. Can you talk a little bit about when that might happen?
Our goal is to hopefully start that work either mid to late January, early February. We're holding off right now because there's a lot of programmed activity happening in the concourse that utilizes that space. And so, and we're just finishing up some drawings right now to actually implement that program. So we're looking right at the beginning of the next year.
Okay, great. And then maybe you can clarify the number, oops, I think I just lost it, of ADA spaces that are going to be added. Shoot, I lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a rough shot at this because I don't have papers in front of me. I had to move to a different room today. But I think we have lost 18 stalls that are on JFK, the closed portion. To date, we've put 8 back, new ADA stalls on JFK and Nancy Pelosi. We're going to put 19 in the bandshell parking lot. And as Hava mentioned earlier, I think we have targeted 16 potential locations on Fulton Street. And so that would be kind of the complement that we're looking at currently. If we went with that second option with that one-way road, I think it affords us about 16 spaces back on JFK Drive if that option is something the board elects to move forward with.
Great. So I think I have at least tried to raise these issues that are in the chat room. So I want to open it up, but I'm having Bruce or somebody maybe can help me. Where am I seeing hands raised?
It's best to go to participation list and
There
go.
we go. Okay.
Yeah, the participants list.
Hi, I have a question. Oh,
Okay, why don't you go ahead? I can't see who's.
Hi, Greg Garr, former HANC board member.
Go ahead, Greg.
And I volunteer in Golden Gate Park every day. I use the 43 and the 44 bus regularly. And when the parking garage is jammed with cars waiting to get in, and Martin Luther King is jammed with cars, it takes forever for the 44 bus to get from the inner Sunset to the Richmond district. It could take 25 minutes to get across the park because there's so many cars on MLK and cars backed up to get into the garage. So I wonder if MTA is looking into how we can move the 44 more quickly through the park, considering all of the gridlock that will be there with the garage.
You're on mute, Hava.
Sorry, I was just trying to write notes in a different screen and then you lose the Zoom. Thank you for that comment about the 44. So certainly not an intention of this project, but an outcome of this work when JFK was closed, is that the 44 on the northern part of this area is actually moving faster because it's no longer competing with car traffic going 8th to Music Concourse before it's coming into MLK, as you noted. I have heard other feedback and from especially from my transit division who have said the exact same thing that you have said about concerns around the 44's reliability and travel time. And that is certainly something we would like to fix. I think that we are this project, as you all can tell, because there's a lot of you in this room, is already very contentious, and we hear that. And so we're hoping, I don't think this will be the end of our conversation about access and mobility within Golden Gate Park. And so your feedback is not only noted, but appreciated and valued. And, I hope to be able to return, in short order to say these are the ways we're going to help to improve the 44 in Golden Gate Park. We do not have any solutions proposed other than the potential retention of closed JFK or car-free JFK, because that does assist the 44 in moving a little bit faster in that portion.
Then I had a question for Dan. Specifically, I wanted to know if you did any research on other cities that have eliminated automobile traffic going into their parks. For instance, Central Park in New York, which has eliminated about 90% of the cars going into Central Park. Prospect Park in Brooklyn, which has eliminated all automobile traffic going in. And Piedmont Park, which I had the pleasure of seeing in 1995, and they have eliminated all of the cars going into the park. And I would just like to see if San Francisco, the green city that it claims to be, can also research other cities to see if we're going forward in the right direction, or are we sacrificing our park to the automobile?
Yeah, Greg. Yeah, Greg, on that one, I have not personally done research specifically to those questions, but I know I've been in conversations with a lot of my MTA colleagues who have expressed that similar parks and how autos are accepted or not in those facilities. So I know that they have a pulse on some of that. So I can't speak specific to that, but it's definitely of interest, and continue to look at that.
Okay. And I wanted to talk to Pi Rod, just one quick sentence, and that is, Pi, we've known each other for a long time, and I just wanted to reinforce the fact that mobility impaired people are the most vulnerable when it comes to confronting automobile traffic, right?
I definitely agree. We had one person in our committee who's definitely wants the JFK closed. She said because her 3-wheel scooter, she can go any place she wants. She's been exploring parts that she hadn't been able to do now, and she knows she's not going to get hit by a car while doing it. So
Right.
yeah, it's a balance. We need to get the accessibility since we have so many different types of mobility issues, we need to get a balance where we create the accessibility for everybody, but we also have to be practical. Not every tree needs a sidewalk to it or a bus stop at it. You know what I mean? So we got to find that balance. Right now, the balance is not there at all.
Thanks, Pi. Good question, Greg. I'm going to give David a chance to ask a question next. David Wu.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, thanks for the presentations. I just had a question about something I didn't see addressed in the presentation, really about like social equity. And you mentioned that SFMTA Rec Park had going to do some focus groups around equity neighborhoods or something like that. But yeah, what I think is interesting about the proposal is, to me, it brings up issues around social equity in terms of access to transportation and open space in San Francisco, and really highlights existing issues. And if already before the pandemic, transportation service was lacking and not enough, and we needed increased service, and then with the pandemic, we've seen cuts to service, and now neighborhoods are having to fight to try and even get back to pre-pandemic levels, which was already inadequate. Yeah, I don't then how to neighborhoods that need increased transit to even access Golden Gate Park, because there isn't adequate transportation to begin with, and they have to rely on automobiles to get to Golden Gate Park, it's just a reality of the situation. Is that being addressed at all in any of these proposals? And is there like any proposal, like I could see it if SFMTA is like, we're gonna, create these new bus lines and increase these lines and make sure that these areas all get connected so that really the whole city is able to like enjoy this car-free space. But kind of absent that, I'm just wondering how this doesn't just block off certain social populations in San Francisco, and that kind of seems like a social equity issue. So wondering if that's being taken into consideration.
It's a lot to handle there. Hava, you're on mute, but I'm going to need some help on this one.
Okay, I'll help you, Dan, because I want to say, like, that feedback is something we have heard. And so this is like a very resonant point. And so it's, I think the idea is that the proposals we originally, that we put out there to the public were really supposed to be springboards to start that conversation and to help us to start thinking about, here were some ideas, what are some more ideas? And so we have started to hear the feedback about some of what the more ideas are. And, we're working internally. And so we have some, I think they're minor improvements. They're certainly not going to be the panacea, and they're certainly not going to be our ability. I think, if speaking out of turn, because Muni is not here, I'm sure Muni would love to create that robust transit network that you're seeking. That we're just not in that position as an agency today. But we have heard that social equity concern, and I do think that we're going to come up with initiatives that we hope, ameliorate at least a bit of that, and just start at least acknowledging that pain that people are on the east side, and yet our biggest parks are frequently on the west side. Absent McLaren. So Dan, don't give me any junk about that. So, and we need, and that MTA as the mobility provider and Rec Park as the parks provider need to start thinking a little more holistically about it. So I don't think we have a solution today, but I want to acknowledge your point and say that it resonates, and we're going to be working to think about what initiatives we should be proposing as part of this when we go to the board that at least begin to address that issue.
Yeah, the other thing too that's happening in parallel with what we're doing here is the San Francisco Transportation Authority is doing outreach to some of these communities. That was my cue to stop. They're going through an outreach process right now to get feedback from some of these same neighborhoods and communities that we're talking about here, and we're looking for feedback through that process as well, which will help inform our program here. So it's multi-pronged, and I think it's, someone could do a master's thesis on those questions that you posed, and they're all important. And we've heard them in most every meeting that we've engaged with. So it's not going unnoticed, and we're working to find out how we can smooth out the edges on some of these things that are actually manageable and doable within the framework of our project here.
Speaking of social equity, are you going to let somebody on the telephone have a chance?
Peter, why don't you go ahead?
So how will I know?
Yeah, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Okay. First of all, I'm very glad to hear less or no cars. I think that cars not only have the potential of killing people or hurting them badly, but there's a whole tension of having to look out for cars, watch out for cars, the whole business that you have to do on city streets. It's wonderful to be able to walk any which way on the street you want, and so on and so forth when it's closed. And you don't have to think, ooh, if I swerve this way or that way, I might bump into this or that vehicle. So in general, I like the direction that much of this seems to be taking. What I want to say is that, first of all, I would like to hear contact information and access information for the folks in charge, as well as for looking at the plans, which I have not seen. To my knowledge, there has been no outreach for folks who are not on a computer by methods you could use: mail, telephone, and also kiosk or some kind of information available at the site. I go past and into the park relatively frequently. I live only a few blocks away, and I have never seen a single word about any of this discussion at all anywhere in or on the periphery of the park, where regular park users or irregular users might see it if they're not otherwise connected. I cringe a little bit when I hear about an online survey, because what about having a survey for those who are not online? Mm-hmm. So in general, something that I said at the outset is a serious issue when you've got a whole range of people. A mayor's report, the city and county digital equity strategic plan for 2019 to 24 said over 100,000 people in the city don't have good access to the internet. That may have been reduced, but there are still a lot of people that don't or may not see or be aware of what you're emailing or what you've put online. So I would like to have, I think, a kiosk of some kind. Maybe it's even just a few at certain places where people can see what's happening in the park or what's planned for the park, and where could you get more information or have questions answered would be extremely useful. So do you have contact information for and especially can you mail stuff to folks who don't have easy access to a computer, and for those who may be able to get it, to know how to find out what the plans are, what the surveys are, what the information, the so-called discussion that you've got going, how they can participate as well.
So Hava or Dan, if you could provide maybe a quick answer to that, that'd be very helpful. And then maybe we'll follow up maybe in another article in The Voice, if nothing else, with some contact information. So do you have that information you can?
And I just wanted to say about Pyron's suggestion, I thought they were all very good, but a map and so on at the bus stops, it would be very valuable and important to have a schedule like what Muni has on many of its stops so that people know how frequently and when the start and stop times are.
Agreed. Sorry to have interrupted you, Peter. So Hava and Dan, could you do a quick response to that?
In short, Peter, I believe you name it. Sorry if I missed your name there, Peter.
Yes.
You bring up a great point, and we've gotten so digital in recent years that everyone kind of expects that as kind of the only means and methods, and we do have a robust digital outreach process that we've done, but we've also tried to do other outreach events throughout the city. And again, it's not perfect, but we're trying. I think we've probably hosted somewhere between 8 to 12. I'm making that number up roughly, events within Golden Gate Park and the concourse, down at the skate area. There's been these rideshare events that have happened in the park, trying to get face-to-face. And we've also had tabling that's across the city, from India Basin to the Phoenix Day events, where we've hosted tables at 4 different locations in the city. So those are just a few, but we've tried to get in front of people face-to-face when we can, with resources that we have at our disposal. And again, trying to touch everybody. But in short, I mean, that doesn't answer your question and doesn't solve the problem, but if I can get your information, I'm happy. Hava and I are happy to. I'll personally mail out a survey. The survey's closed, but the survey has some useful information on it, and I'll print out the presentation and send hard copies to anyone who wants to have something on their coffee table to look at. So if there's a way I can get names and mailing addresses, maybe through you, Jamie, or something.
Sure, by giving your contact information, such as phone number, mailing address, and or email address.
Why
Yeah.
don't?
I'll give my work phone number. It's 415-646-2491. And you can give me a call anytime from 9 to 5 and sometimes at 8:12 p.m. And I'll also say, Peter, I'm sorry we missed you. We actually had a dozen pop-up events in the park. And so for those of you who did not see city staff out there, we're doing our best. And then we did have a paper survey. So for anyone who did encounter us at any one of our dozen events, we got 10% of our surveys were actually received on paper. And we said we had 8,000 digital surveys, and I think like 800 paper surveys was my last count, but I could be wrong.
My key is I appreciate tabling and personal appearances and availability. What I'm saying is that a flyer in some place where it can be seen 24 hours a day is a thing that would have much more availability for people who happen to be in the area or know that they can check there to find those events that you are personally at. Again, there's nothing wrong, and it's good that you're available, but the notification is the issue for folks, as I say, who don't have such easy access to computer. And, the park headquarters, for example, you could have just a glass bulletin board. Here's what's happening with the park. Here's this particular program. Here's where we are at and where we're going with it. And that could be there day and night.
So if I can just interrupt, Peter, we're running out of time here. Hava and Dan.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your comments. Maybe that is something that you can think about for the next phase of your project in terms of public information and outreach. So hopefully that was helpful feedback. I'm really sorry, but we're right at about the time that we need to end. And I want to thank, and I'm sorry that I missed questions that didn't get addressed. Want to thank Dan and Hava and Pi for being here tonight and giving really excellent presentations. And we'll try to do some follow-up work and contact with you to maybe get more information, and if nothing else, put it in another article in the HANC Voice. So again, thank you so much, everybody, and look forward to hearing more from all of you about the project.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming to present. Thanks, Jamie. And so now we're switching gears to redistricting. And so I would like to introduce Sana, who's kind enough to join us from SF Rising, just to talk a little bit about redistricting and kind of what's going on with that and kind of the process as it begins to pick up here in San Francisco and all the impacts that it has. And I think she also has some maybe specific questions for us, but yeah, I'll pass it over to you, Sana.
Thanks, David. It's nice to be here. Nice to see everyone. I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay.
Yes, great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so like David said, my name is Sana and I am from SF Rising, and really excited to talk to y'all about redistricting today. So this is kind of the plan I had for this discussion. Thought we could do some introductions. I'll give a little background on what redistricting is. I'll explain the redistricting task force, so kind of how the process happens here in San Francisco. And I'll explain a bit about our community outreach project, which, like David said, is kind of in relation to some of those questions that we have for y'all. And that will go into the activity and discussion. So yeah, like I said, my name is Sana. I haven't met most of you before, so I'd love if you could share your name, pronouns, and you know, anything else, maybe something you know about redistricting in the chat. And yeah, I joined SF Rising in July as an organizer and communications coordinator, and have been working on redistricting since then. And the process has definitely, you know, been very interesting to watch and learn from. And I'm excited to kind of share where we're at with y'all. So yeah, I thought I'd start off with just what is redistricting, but also understanding that there might be folks here who maybe participated in the last redistricting process in 2010, 2011. And so does anyone want to come off mute and share a little bit about what you know about redistricting, what it is, any experience you've had with it?
I'll give it a shot. I'm learning more about it. I've admittedly seen this presentation before, but I think every 10 years with the new census, there's redistricting, and it has political implications because it changes district boundaries and constituents and who votes in that district.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. That's spot on. I'm curious if anyone here played a role or just paid attention to the last redistricting process, and if they want to come off mute and just share like any takeaways or learnings or things you think would be helpful to keep in mind for this time.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Tab, and I was in the last two rounds 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And one thing I will say, it really matters that people participate because if people are not there to make sure that certain boundaries that are considered a part of a particular community or certain groups of particular communities are not properly represented, either included in an area or perhaps too badly split up, that really can have, you know, a pretty devastating impact if people let it go unrecognized. So I think community participation and observation is absolutely critical in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, with redistricting, thank you for sharing that, by the way. With redistricting, it's like it only happens every 10 years. And so it can seem like kind of this strange thing to tackle. But like we do have to remember that it's happened, you know, before, and there are probably folks in our communities that have experience with it, and we can learn from that. and learn from previous processes. But yeah, this has already been touched on, but just in case there are folks who are new to redistricting, because it can definitely seem like this complex, uninviting process that's like very bureaucratic and unwelcoming. I just want to break it down for those folks. So every 10 years, we know that census data is collected, and that just happened in 2020. And then the following year, that census data is released. So we know where the population has shifted, where people have moved in and out of the state or within, for example, San Francisco. And then redistricting happens so that each district, whether it be at the federal level, state, or local, each district has about the same population. And we'll go more into the numbers specifically from this last census in just a little bit. But yeah, so, you know, you might have been hearing in the news, like this has been going on at the state level. Their timeline's a lot shorter. So it's, or I'll say a lot different, because it's their deadline to submit maps is December. So you might have heard, you know, they released some like proposals for draft maps for the Assembly and the State Senate and Congress, and they're working to finalize those pretty soon. For SF Rising, we're focusing on the local redistricting process. So this will be the Board of Supervisors district lines or supervisorial boundaries. And yeah, I think a lot of attention gets paid to, like, you know, congressional lines, and those are super important. State lines are super important, but local is also very important. And that is why we are making that our priority. I'm going to skip over this video, but I'd be happy to link it in the chat. This is just a little bit about gerrymandering. If anybody's curious what, like, if you've heard of packing or cracking, two tactics that are used to gain political power by parties, I can share this later. And of course, we've probably heard a lot about this in the news as well across other states. You know, maps going to the courts because there's accusations of gerrymandering. Yeah, and you know, it's really important to remember too that redistricting is about elections and voting, but it's also about more than just that. It also impacts our district's abilities to get funding for things like schools and hospitals, parks, community resources and services. And so, you know, I think this is really important, because when we make it just about voting, it can seem like it only matters to citizens or people who are eligible to vote. But this is a way we want to engage all people, because everyone who lives in a district is affected by who we're represented or what resources are allocated to that district. All right. Any questions about just the basics of redistricting so far? Let me check the chat here. Yeah, I'm seeing a question about, I think, which districts will grow and which ones will shrink. I'm going to get into that in just a moment. How can redistricting be used to elect more women? I would say that, you know, we need to make sure that the process is like fair and transparent and accessible, so that as many people from various communities can speak out for their communities of interest. And I'll go more into that in a little bit too. But I think, yeah, when we make the redistricting process more democratic, more voices come in and we can see the lines being drawn in a more fair way, and more than likely elect more people that represent us and, yeah, our values.
How are the folks chosen now who are doing the redistricting?
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into this slide. So in San Francisco, so every you know, county, city, state has their own way of doing redistricting. in San Francisco, how it works is there is a 9-member task force called the Redistricting Task Force that has been appointed and given this task of, creating a district map and submitting it. So first, let's go into the members. So there are 9 members on the task force. Like I said, 3 were appointed by the mayor, 3 by the Board of Supervisors, and 3 by the Elections Commission. And the 3 folks you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here are 3 members that SF Rising supported in getting appointed because we really believed they were, leaders, community leaders who were rooted in the experiences of their neighborhoods and districts. And so they are currently task force members, as well as 6 others. And the way that the process works is, like I said, their ultimate goal is to determine that new map with the new Board of Supervisors districts. How will they do that? So they've been meeting since mid-September, having regular meetings about twice a month, with more to be added soon. And they should be getting input from the public on how the process should work, hearing testimony from community members. And they'll be doing this by working with a mapping consultant as well. And their final deadline to submit their map is April 15th of this coming year, which is a little further out than a lot of other redistricting processes. You might have heard of like other cities or counties having an earlier deadline. I just talked about the state having an earlier deadline, which can be both a good and bad thing. But one reason it's good is we can kind of look to the other, redistricting processes and learn from them, and use that in this one as well. So you might be wondering, how do they even start? Like, what parameters do they need to follow? So we could get really in the weeds here, but I think I'll just pull out a couple of examples, and I'm happy to send a link of, more information on their guidelines from Common Cause, who has a lot of great resources on redistricting. So the first one's pretty easy, right? Like contiguity. So it needs to be like one unbroken line for each boundary. It can't be like broken and then a complete line here. It has to be one unbroken line. The next one is super important, and kind of our focus is SF Rising and what I'll be going more into soon, which is maintaining neighborhoods and communities of interest. And if you don't know what a community of interest is, I'll be going more into that on the next slide. But that's like kind of our priority, and it also should be a priority for the task force. The other one I wanted to pull out was, well, I guess 2 more. So one is number 6. So basically it's saying that each district needs to be more or less the same number of people, which is why the whole redistricting process happens in the first place. And then with the Voting Rights Act compliance, this is basically about making sure that, the new district maps don't dilute racial or ethnic minorities' voices. And of course, SF Rising, if you're not familiar with us, we focus specifically on working class communities of color and building political power in those communities. So that's also going to be something we'll be paying attention to. So yeah, like I said, I wanted to go a little more into communities of interest. This is a pretty common phrase in redistricting. You might hear it as COI as well, COI. And this again is a priority. It should be a priority for the redistricting task force in keeping these communities together, unless there's a really, really, really good reason for them not to, which might be like there's just no way around having, equal population in each district or something like that. And this will be probably the biggest piece that we'll be advocating for, is keeping communities of interest together as much as we can. So what is a COI, or community of interest? This is a group of people who would benefit from being in one district because they have either a shared background, identity, values, experience. It can be pretty, it can mean a lot of things, but we'll, like I said, be focusing a lot on communities of color and working class communities. But there are lots of other examples that fall outside that. It could be all of you, you're all members of one neighborhood council. It could be residents on a particular block with a goal of protecting renters, or parents with children who go to a certain school. And I'm wondering, apart from, being in this organization together, on this council together, what are some of the communities of interest that y'all are a part of?
I'm happy to speak to that. This is Lisa. The Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council has a history, a long and proven history of attempting to give voice to people who perhaps are not listened to, or who don't have as strong a voice as perhaps some of the other interests in our city. And I believe that this has become even more essential in these times with such income disparities that we have. And we have many, many new folks who've come, which is wonderful. And there are certainly warring factions between property owners and people who are renters. And so I think a really good illustration of what we've been up to is the site at 730 Stanyon and future development there. And we focused on really pushing the city to build truly affordable housing for 3 underserved communities in District 5. Those being the transitional aged youth and elders, District 5 elders, and low-income families. And so, and anyone else here is certainly welcome to chime in to my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was just writing that down because that actually goes into what we're kind of asking from neighborhood groups and organizations is to name those groups so that we can better advocate for them. And that's kind of going more into the whole project that I'll explain in just a little bit, but that's great. Thank you.
I saw Bruce, you had your hand up. I don't know if that was a question or if you have.
Yeah, I had my hand up. Yeah, two questions. Thanks, Sana, for the presentation. It's very informative. One is, where and when can the public provide input to the redistricting committee? And also, how are you monitoring enforcement, that everything is staying, on the up and up? Because we've seen reports that some redistricting committees are doing things in secret and not being truthful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great questions. So for the first one, like I said, the redistricting task force has been meeting since about mid-September, and those meetings are ongoing. There's actually one tomorrow at 3 p.m. And I'd be happy to share the link to the task force website if you wanted to join. And then there won't be one until January. The task force website also has like their meeting schedule. So if you did want to join, they have a chance for public comment after every item, and then a chance for general public comment at the end. You could also email them if you have any input, but currently they're not quite at the stage of getting input on like specific maps or anything like that, because they haven't drafted them yet. So yeah, the input could be more general, more about, a community you want to keep together, which we definitely encourage you to do. But in terms of like testimony on a specific map or a draft map, they just haven't released those yet. So that is probably to come in, hopefully January, if not February. Yeah. And then, I'm sorry, your second question was about, yeah, so they do have, a set of guidelines to make sure that, if it's like more than half the task force is meeting, it needs to be made public. All the communications they're getting regarding redistricting is also kind of at any time they could ask for those to be, shared with the whole group as well and with the public. But yeah, in terms of keeping tabs, like as a working group, we are working with those 3 task force members to make sure that the process is as transparent as can be. And that's, yeah, kind of where we're at right now. But always open to ideas or suggestions if you have any, because that will definitely be a big one moving forward. Yeah.
I have a nice German Shepherd over here.
German Shepherd, perfect. Just for
Do you
time's
have
sake.
contact information? Do you have contact information for those who don't have computers or easy access to computers?
Yeah, we can give you their address if you want to write in too. And all of that is on the task force website. So after this, I can share that link. And if you want me to share the address directly with you too, I can do that. Yeah, of course. And just for time's sake, I did want to move on because I think this is kind of the fun part and like the part everyone's probably like wondering the most about, which is like what will change and like what districts actually have to change. So first of all, because of the census, we know that San Francisco has gained about 70,000 new residents, which is kind of interesting considering, all the media about this huge exodus, from the Bay Area and California. So that's one big thing to note is we gained 70,000 new residents. And as you can see, these 11 Board of Supervisors district lines or supervisorial district lines will need to be redrawn to account for that population change. And like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be like an exact number in each district. And that's because we understand there's communities of interest that are important to keep together. And so there is like a percentage deviation. And I'll go into that in just a moment. But so as you can see on the right-hand column, that's the total population with this new census data. And this is about how much will need to be in each district. So about 79,000 people in each district. And so that means it can be between this bottom number here. I won't go into the exact each digit, but it'll be between about 75,000 and 83,000 people. So some might be a little less, some might be a little more, but as long as they're within that 5% deviation, that's legally allowed. And this is like, I think the most interesting or like the most telling. So this shows which districts need to grow and which districts need to shrink. So for District 5, for example, it actually doesn't need to do either. It's about 2% deviation over. And so, if everything else was also within that deviation, it would be okay. But unfortunately, it's not. So as you can see, the green rows are the districts that will need to grow. So currently within that district, there's not enough people to meet that 5% deviation. So it's not quite enough, close to 79,000. So those districts, the borders will need to expand so that more people reside within that district. For the red districts, so you can see District 6 and District 10, those ones actually need to shrink because so many people have moved there that it's gone over the permissible deviation. And you'll notice that District 6 is the biggest one by far, right? So it's 26.9% deviation. So that means a ton of people moved to District 6 in the past 10 years. And so it will actually need to lose between 17,000 and 325,300 people. And of course, District 6 does border District 5. So that is something to keep in mind. You know, like, yes, District 5 doesn't technically need to grow or shrink, but because of the way redistricting works, it will need to pull from some places, you know, it'll need to cut from other places. And so everything will change a little bit, although we will most likely see the most change around District 6. And this is kind of a little closer look at the timeline. So I won't go into each single one, but like I said, they're still kind of in this phase of like deciding logistics and who will play what role and what outreach will look like. And they have released a mapping tool, but are still kind of working out some things with it. I don't think it's the most user-friendly right now. And so that's why, as an organization, we haven't really been, you know, putting it out there and telling people to start using it. I think it still needs a little bit of work, but they have released a mapping tool for community members to start mapping their draft maps. And they're making an outreach plan right now. We still don't know exactly what the timeline will look like for public testimonial maps, but of course, because the deadline is April 15th, that needs to happen sometime between January and April 15th, which isn't a lot of time. I'll stop for questions before I go into the community outreach project. And I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. Okay. Will the map be made public on April 15th? Yes, it should be made public before April 15th. To answer your question, Luke, so the way it'll work is they'll release a draft map, which is basically like a proposed map. They should get input on it, go back and make revisions, and then release it publicly. April 15th is like the very, very, very last day that they should submit it. But hopefully they'll do it beforehand. Yeah. Okay, thanks, David, for sharing that task force website. Yeah, so that's where you can find the schedule. You can find the link to SF.gov TV with the recordings of previous meetings and other information.
Could you speak to that website, please, for those of us on the telephone?
Yes. Yeah, so it's sf.gov.
Say it again.
sf.gov/public. And then there's a hyphen or a dash body /2020 census
2020
census redistricting I'm sorry, task and force.
Tech, did you say?
Task, like TASK.
Yeah.
Force. And yeah, I saw a request to go back to this. Oh, the district map. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. Was this the map folks wanted to see? Okay, yeah. Cool. And I can also share a packet we put together, which has the numbers of like how much it needs to shrink by or grow by on the districts itself. That might be helpful. So I'll share that at the end too. And if anyone wants a printed packet, we're also happy to print that out and mail it to you. And yeah, like I said, District 6 will need to shrink the most. And so, you kind of think through the ramifications for District 5, like the shrinking might mean that some of it goes to District 5. And I think District 1 needed to expand. And that doesn't necessarily mean it'll come from District 5. It might come from District 2 or District 4, but just something to be thinking about. I think I'll move on. Yeah, just for time's sake. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce this community outreach project that SF Rising started. So we have been working with a number of our affiliates, allies, and other community members in a work group. And we've been paying attention to this process so far. And I think all of us have had this like collective nervousness about how slow the task force has been going. And so we decided that we're not going to wait for, them to start getting community input and feedback on communities of interest, but that we wanted to start getting this input now so that it could inform what we hope to turn into a community unity map that would hopefully reflect as many communities in San Francisco as possible. And so what this has looked like is reaching out to a number of grassroots organizations and neighborhood associations and other orgs in San Francisco and asking them to fill out a questionnaire, which we basically ask, describe your community of interest, any historical context we should know about, what landmarks define that community of interest, and then also asking them to map their communities so we can compile all of this information. And so when the task force is, later on in the process saying, we're going to cut through this part of District 5, we can say, well, no, actually, there's a really important community of interest here, and it's vital that we keep it together. So please don't do that. Or, please cut here instead. So yeah, like I said, we have been doing this outreach and hoping to, by the end of the month, have as much information as we can, and hopefully in early January start really putting all of that information together to help us better advocate. And yeah, I was going to have us do this now, but I think what might work better is because there's also quite a few folks on this call, and I understand not everyone might feel like they're part of like the exact same community of interest, or they might have a number of other COIs that they're a part of that they would like to individually fill this out. I'll share a link to the chat in it and also an email if you would prefer paper copies of all of this. But basically, this is what the questionnaire looks like. Kind of like I mentioned, a lot of it is around describing your community of interest and any other ways you want to, join us, if you want to join our work group, or, give public comment at task force meetings. And we also have like some maps like this in the packet, just for reference as well. So some census data maps. And actually I can share what the packet looks like right now.
And maybe before you go, we could just would it be best to get your contact info and then folks can reach out to you? Is that the way to do it?
Yeah, I think that would be great. And that way I can, send it out to folks if they can't save it from the chat today. But yeah, so basically, like I said, what we're hoping is we can send this packet to folks and have them fill out the questionnaire and also map their communities. And maybe if we have a little bit of time, we can kind of start that conversation. But I would also like to give you all these tools to do yourself if you have other COIs that you want to describe. So if you forgot kind of what I went over today, like it kind of reviews that. And then this is the map that I said goes into each district and which needs to grow and which needs to shrink. And then, this is the questionnaire if you want to print it out, or we can send it to you. We also have it in a Google form. And then it has a lot of like context, or it has a lot of maps for context. Like if you need to look at, you know, street names, things like that. But of course, I do want to say that you don't have to be, you know, super detailed. Like, don't let that stop you from filling out the form. Like, any information for us is helpful. So if you're not, you know, you don't need to necessarily go into like street names or like say like, oh yeah, this community, you know, goes up to like this stop sign. You could also just describe your community and generally around where it is.
Could you give the contact information for those of us on the phone who can't see anything, and also who would like to get in touch, hopefully by phone or by mail, as well as perhaps by email or some other way?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give out my email at the end here, in case folks would like me to send them any of these links. But for now, I'll put this in the chat. Yeah, definitely, Teresa. I can, oh, sorry, send that direct. I can make sure to send you a printout. I would say, yeah, just let me know, you know, where to send it to, and we can send you both the packet and some of the maps. That way you can like draw it on. It might be even easier than trying to do it on like a digital map. But yeah, just before I do that, I would love to hear a little bit of, you know, what communities of interest. I know someone had started saying, you know, D5 elders, low-income families, and transitional age youth. As some of the communities of interest in District 5, but I'm curious if there's others folks feel like they want to raise here as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll maybe just echo some on the transitional aged youth. Yeah, kind of like the hate, especially being a place where there's a lot of homeless youth. So I'd say that's definitely a really important population. Then I saw in the chat from Teresa, support for low-income people living under rent control. So yeah, rent controlled tenants, definitely.
I would say tenants and renters, definitely. Yes.
I'm sorry, I missed part of that. You said tenants?
Tenants and renters. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's kind of hard to think about communities of interest kinds of categories. Some ones I've tried to play with were like, we were the largest area who voted no on the sit-lie law in the city, that we were one of the most progressive communities in voting. You can look at where our votes go, but those don't feel like the same as, you know, like that we all go to a certain church, or that we walk our dogs, or some other things. So I really need some more examples of communities of interest, or to help me anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I will say, yeah, so, you know, with redistricting, they can't use like candidate choices or party as a community of interest. So you can't say like, you know, Democrats in a certain neighborhood, but you actually can use how people vote on ballot measures, or like if they support, you know, environmental justice or like progressive values in that way. That does constitute a community of interest, because they have like a shared value, and it's not you know, technically partisan or a specific candidate. So that is something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think you're on the right track though, if you feel like there's a certain group of people who have a common goal like that. I think that's definitely a community of interest.
I would second what Tess said about political views and progressive and so on, and might also add superannuated hippies.
Awesome. I'm seeing also more in the chat. Communities of interest near the Fillmore district. Sitley Law is a good example. Elect more women. Yeah, this is all really helpful. Any others?
Well, Luke put in the chat about the African Americans. In D5, we have a large population of African Americans, and that is good. That is a good thing, and we want to keep it intact.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
will assert that anyway.
Yeah, that's a really good note, because I think we could look to the census data to see exactly where they are, but that's really helpful. Thank you. And of course, you know, if there's specific folks who want to also come out and give us more feedback, because we know the census wasn't filled out by everyone and might not be as accurate as actually talking to people. I'm seeing the inner Sunset area has a high percentage of Asian Americans and kept together in 4, 5, or 7. Yes, this is all really helpful. Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to continue to capture this, all this great stuff that's coming in from the chat. But just in these last few minutes, I will also put my email in the chat and say it out loud for anyone who can't see it. And yeah, like I said, if you do want a paper copy of the questionnaire and the redistricting packet, we would be happy to send that to you. Just send us the address that you would like it sent to. And yeah, if you know, also if there's other communities of interest you're a part of, and maybe go to other meetings and want to do a presentation like this or facilitate a conversation to get more information about COIS, we would be happy to provide you with the materials to do that. So like, you know, the slides from today and facilitation guide as well. But yeah, any other questions before I hop off and start taking notes of all that's being said in the chat?
I have a comment.
Yes, could you please give your contact information, especially also for those who only have phone or mail contact availability?
Yes. Yes, let me do that right now.
I don't know if this meeting is being cut off. I don't know if we're being cut off at 9 o'clock, but it's close.
Yeah, let me do that right now. So my email is Sana, SANA, dot Sethi, SETHI, at sanfranciscorising.org.
I have a comment, Sana.
Yeah, go for it.
On a community of interest. We have more dogs and kids in the city. And I think they are definitely could be considered a community of interest because they also make up a significant slice of the economic pie when it comes to purchasing supplies of food and whatnot.
Dog owners, yeah.
That doesn't exclude other pets too, but I'm just, you know, it's an interesting thought. I mean, yeah, because it's a significant statistic. And there's a kitty right there.
That is interesting. I haven't heard of that before. Sorry, did I cut someone off? Yes.
Right. So it might help us understand. Tell us a little bit more about SF Rising. It might help us better understand the concept of communities of interest. What's the history of this organization? Did you participate in the last census, the last redistricting, for example, 10 years ago?
Yeah, so we're actually an alliance. By the way, are we getting cut off at 9? Because I don't want to.
Maybe, yeah, we could just, that could be the last just kind of question. So we just getting close to 9. But
Sure, I'll keep it short. Yeah, so we're actually an alliance of 8 community organizations. So that includes, like, you might have heard of Coleman Advocates or Causa Justa, Poder. So yeah, we both function as like kind of an umbrella for those organizations and support and work with them. But specifically SF Rising came up, and I don't think we were part of the last redistricting process because we're newer than that. But we came up to basically help build political power for working class people of color in San Francisco, specifically through yeah, we have an action fund as well. So that side of things works on elections specifically, and other local politics. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate all the feedback, and I'll be sure to send over all of these links, either maybe just to David, and David could pass them along.
great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sana, and yeah, and for all the work SF Rising is doing and kind of convening and creating all these resources and sharing them out. Yeah. So really appreciate you coming today to present and yeah, sharing those with us and all your contact information and everything. So yeah, thank you everybody. I also saw Jimbo from Supervisor Preston's office was here. Sorry, I saw you. Good, glad you could be here with us.
You.
But yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody for a great and very interesting and informative meeting. Yeah, I hope everybody has a good holiday and thanks for joining us.